King Solomon was famously wise, but he was not born that way. He became wise with God's help. He was so famous for being wise, in fact, that the traditional view was that Solomon was the author of the book of Proverbs. The idea was that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Pentateuch. King David, noted musician that he was, would have written all of the Psalms, and Solomon then wrote Proverbs. Unfortunately, if we're going to be wise today, we have to admit that this simple schema doesn't actually hold up under historical evidence. Scholars don't think we can so easily attribute the books in this manner, or at least all of them or all parts of them, to these guys. But that doesn't mean it's unhelpful. It reminds us that God is revealed in a multiplicity of ways, through the stories of matriarchs and patriarchs, through the law, yes, through the exile, through song and story, and yes, through the wisdom tradition like we find in Proverbs. King Solomon did not write the book of Proverbs, but he was famously wise. And in our Hebrew Bible story today, we have the account from 1 Kings of how Solomon ended up that way. After his tumultuous reign, King David died and slept with his ancestors. And after some more tumult, Solomon succeeded him as king. And as the story goes, God came to Solomon and gave him the opportunity to ask for a gift. And Solomon said, "I wish to be very mindful, very demure, very classy." If you don't get that joke, congratulations, you do not spend too much time online. You are actually doing really well. But the gist of it is that he actually is asking to be wise. It's not that far off from the truth. He asked for the gift of discerning what is right in a very complicated world, which we might call being mindful. And God granted this gift because Solomon did not ask for a long life. He did not ask for riches. He did not ask for the life of his enemies. He asked for wisdom. I think the lesson in this story is that the first step to finding wisdom is simply to seek it. First step to finding wisdom is simply to say, I'm going to seek it. And now I realize this sounds entirely too simple, right? Because the first step to me looking like Chris Hemsworth is not just saying, I want to look like Chris Hemsworth. I think it's possible. I don't appreciate some of the laughter. The trick, I think, is what you have to give up when you start seeking after wisdom. Because to seek after wisdom, you actually have to give up certainty. Wisdom offers context and clues instead of clear answers. It offers mystery instead of mastery, encounter with God instead of clear convictions. It is a posture toward the world instead of a clear path laid out before you. And so to seek wisdom, you have to give up certainty. And human beings do not do so hot without certainty. We need a safe and stable place to stand. We need to feel wrapped in a larger story, something that gives our lives meaning and structure. We all have a different tolerance level, right? Some of us need to have 2 feet planted on stable ground. Some of us can maybe stand on 1 foot and feel around a little bit, being a little uncertain. But all of us need some kind of certainty in our lives. Having no certainty at all is like standing on a pogo stick on top of a skateboard, on top of a beach ball, floating in the ocean. Simone Biles could do it, but the rest of us are just going to fall down. So instead, what do? We seek certainty. We seek stable ground. We want to be sure about things. Sure about our political beliefs, sure about our religious beliefs, sure about our interpretations of history, about our interpretations of Scripture, sure about which one of us actually started that fight, sure about who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. what's normal, what's weird, what a man should look like, what a woman should look like, what career we're supposed to choose next. I'm willing to bet that the most annoying person you know is absolutely certain they are right about all sorts of stuff. And I'm also willing to bet that they are so annoying because you're absolutely certain they are wrong about most of those things. I also bet that some of you felt a little bit uncomfortable with today's reading from Ephesians, because this whole put on the armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, that whole thing reminds you of religious folk who are dead set in their beliefs. So certain they are that they view their doctrine as an armor, and they see anyone who doesn't agree with them as an enemy to be conquered. The uncomfortable truth is that all of us make an idol out of being sure about something. Yes, some people do it with religion, other people with their political views, but other folks about just which band is best or why you should be a vegan. Human beings need some kind of certainty, or it feels like the world is falling apart around us. We can live without many, many things, but we cannot live without meaning. So here's why we never seek the wisdom God has to offer us. Because we are so sure we are already wise. Some part of us is convinced that we've already got the world figured out. We're like the intern who's been on the job for 4 days and is just running around courageously breaking things and doesn't realize it. Our certainty leaves us feeling safe, even though the world is so complicated. And it's no accident that the more overwhelming and the more complicated the world feels, the more we take refuge in things like nationality or ethnicity or fundamentalism or conspiracy theories. These things make us feel certain. They make us feel like we're already wise. But this is a false wisdom. It is a cheap wisdom, not the wisdom of God. And we can see this right there in God's reply to Solomon. Because God says, "You did not ask for long life or riches or the life of your enemy." Long life. That feeling of being safe, that feeling of being comfortable, of being out of danger because your convictions are your identity and they don't get questioned. Riches. The wisdom that says that your life can be judged by how much you earn, how popular you get, how much stuff you buy. Enemies. The wisdom of simply just labeling things good or evil, friend or foe, until all of the world is neatly divvied up and we don't need to actually encounter real human beings in their God-given complexity. We don't need to see the human beings trapped in death-dealing systems. We can just say good, bad, and be done. This is the false wisdom of the world. And it is what I think Ephesians is trying to get at when it says that our struggle is not against blood and flesh, those real human beings, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. You can interpret this supernaturally, or you can interpret it metaphorically, but I think the point fundamentally remains the same. We're up against a false wisdom that infiltrates our minds, our bodies, our entire societies, and it gives us this lure of feeling sure about stuff all the time. And so we don't seek God's wisdom because we'd have to give up being sure. And that usually does not change until life throws you enough curveballs that certainty doesn't seem so certain anymore. The reason that intern feels so confident is they have not been on the job long enough to mess up, right? The reason our elders can be so wise isn't because age just automatically makes you wiser. It's just you have had more opportunity to let go of easy black and white thinking. You've had more opportunity to have life throw you a curveball. if you sit in deep conversation with someone who has lived a lot more life than you have, you will find a wisdom that is born of ups and downs, of mistakes, of missed opportunities, of joy and grief, of suffering and surrender. The funny paradox of being alive is that we all want to be wise in order to stay safe, to avoid suffering, and yet suffering ends up being the exact thing that knocks us out of our certainty, that makes us more open to mystery, to actually truly being wise. We need something to come into our lives from the outside to knock us out of our comfort zone. And this is why I have always found such power in the story we tell about God's love made manifest in Jesus Christ. Because our story is about God coming to be with us, of love incarnate, of wisdom personified, coming to teach and to heal. And the response was anger and violence and crucifixion. To me, the cross is not just about the forgiveness of sins, but also knocking us out of our certainty. For if it is anything, it is a rock-bottom moment for humanity, something that should shock us to our solid foundations. It drives me bonkers that people use this story to go out and find enemies and try to conquer them, when so much of this story is about human beings actually getting it wrong. It is a story about how everything we thought we knew about God was incorrect. We thought God was up there and on high, and God was down here in the muck. We thought God was power and control. God was selfless surrender. We thought God would do violence to the ones we hate. God was undergoing violence for our own faults. We thought it was about getting to God. God was coming to us. We thought it was about building an empire of power and privilege. You know what? God got crucified by the empire. We thought if we earned God's favor, it would make us wise. We become wise when we realize there was nothing we could do to make God love us any more or any less. We thought God was about being sure all the time. And God took everything that we were so certain about and nailed it to a cross. I know for sure that God is real. I know for sure that God is love. I've experienced God's presence in my life. I don't think I'd be alive today without that encounter, but I can't explain it always. And everything else, I admit, there's a possibility I might be wrong about. I believe it. I live by it. Try to let it shape my life. But until God's final future arrives, it's all provisional in some sense. It's all mystery. That's why at our church we like to explore all the options. To say, here's the way a verse could be interpreted, the hundreds of ways. Here's all the ways people have understood God, not just the one right one. And I will say, if you've been in Bible study, you know, I will say which ones I think are actually supported by the history and the context and the data. I will tell you which ones are life-giving, which ones have been weaponized against black folks or queer folks or women. But I will also tell you that we are open to being wrong. Because if the cross is true, then God is revealed in our confusion, in our uncertainty, in the dimness and the shadow and the dark nights. But because the cross is part of our story, that confusion becomes a solid place for us to stand. The power of God that the author of Ephesians is talking about, the power of the armor of God, that's not the power to conquer like a Roman legion. It's the power to go to a Roman cross out of love. Ephesians is really being quite countercultural. It suggests wrapping yourself in the sure fact of your identity as a child of God so that you do not need to be so certain about everything else. It gives you this stable home base to go and explore the frontiers of your own beliefs, of what you were taught, of what your family taught. We wrap ourselves in the armor of God, the gauntlets of skepticism, the helmet of hard questions, the breastplate of being brave enough to question our convictions, the armor of God's surrendering love, so that is the core of our identity and not a set of beliefs. Put very simply, knowing Jesus should make you feel loved and safe. And the fact that the cross stands as the ultimate no to judgmentalism and fundamentalism and grand human attempts at certainty, if you put these two things together, you have a story that can leave you unafraid of mystery. Your stable foundation is not being sure about stuff, but being a beloved child of God. And your call is to abandon certainty, not to become foolish, but because letting go of certainty makes you wise enough to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God. So King Solomon wasn't born wise. He became wise with God's help by admitting he needed God's wisdom. We can all do this. And so let us let God guide us as we walk this road together.